We're at the South Carolina Department of Archives and History. This is a government agency. It was established in 1905 with the mission to preserve and promote South Carolina's documentary and cultural heritage. All the state's documentary heritage is here. So documents dealing with the history of South Carolina, local municipalities, counties, anything dealing with state government is located in this building. All of our documents are stored on 3 floors of climate-controlled space, which we call the vault. And that would be very large football field-sized rooms that's kept at 60 degrees Fahrenheit, 50% relative humidity, conditions that are really optimal for the preservation of documents. We're going to show you some of the most important documents that deal with Columbia's history, and some of which deal with not just Columbia's history, but the state's history and even national history. And we have documents here that are of great national significance that played a big part in the way the world shaped and looked today. Well, we're standing right now in the research room of the South Carolina Department of Archives and History, and this is where the majority of our customers come to use the agency. 70% of our customers are genealogists, 20% are professional historians, and about 10% are state government representatives. And when they come here, they ask to see original documents. We don't break out these kinds of documents for them, but these are really treasures that we have here related to South Carolina history and Columbia's history. This is the original act that established Columbia as the state capital. It's 22nd day of March, 1786. And what it did was it was an act to purchase 2 square miles of land on the east bank of the Congaree River, owned by James and Thomas Taylor. And we've got this plat here that shows the location, and the high ground is marked, which would eventually be the site of the state capitol. But this is really important to South Carolina history because heretofore all state government had been located in Charleston. And as the population grew in the upstate and the Midlands areas of the state, those residents felt burdened by having to travel to Charleston to conduct any kind of state business. And so this moved the state capital to the center of the state, which had a very transformative effect on the state of South Carolina. And we also have with us the other really important thing that happened to the city early on in its history was the establishment of South Carolina College. And so we've got the act that established South Carolina College on December 19th, 1801. Some of the really fascinating things about it is that the state set aside $50,000 for the establishment of the college and $6,000 a year, which made it really the best funded, the first really well-funded public university in the United States of America. And right here, this 1846 plat shows in blue the area that had been set aside for the state college, once again within the city on the east bank of the Congaree River. There are lots of great architectural drawings and plats in the building, and this one is a drawing of the courthouse and post office. It dates to 1870, and this was the really first big federal construction project during Reconstruction in Columbia. Much of the city had been devastated by fire on February 17, 1865. But this was the federal government's efforts to have a very nice architectural presence in the city. And that building is now City Hall, still located here, still standing. I think an architectural record is a valuable part of the state's past. It gives you, especially if you have various renditions of a certain building, it gives you an idea into what the architect was thinking at the time, how architecture was meant to be emblematic of certain purposes in state government. And this building in particular is really a beautiful structure that the federal government put money into to make a presence in a city that had been devastated by war. So it gives you an idea into the mindset of people at the time, the federal government's efforts to perhaps in some way compensate for what had happened in 1865. The last 2 documents we have are of great significance nationally. This is the November 24th, 1832 Ordinance of Nullification. By the 1830s, South Carolina had undergone a decade of declining cotton prices, rice prices, and South Carolinians were reacting to the tariffs of 1828 and 1832 that the federal government had passed. And these were tariffs on manufactured goods in England that would be brought to South Carolina and purchased by planters. So there were tariffs that benefited manufacturing interests in the North to the detriment of Southern planters. And so South Carolinians in 1832 formed a convention of the people and met in Columbia in the House chambers of the old State House and decided to nullify the tariffs of 1828 and 1832. And this is the document that does that. They thought initially that there was a chance that they would have some sort of support from Andrew Jackson, who himself was a South Carolinian, was president at the time. But Jackson convinced Congress to pass a force bill, which basically said that the tariffs would be collected in Charleston, and if they were not collected, then he would send federal troops to Charleston to collect those tariffs. So South Carolina, in response, mobilized its militia, and it looked like there'd be war between the state and the federal government until Congress passed a compromise tariff that was acceptable to South Carolinians. So the convention once again met, and they withdrew the Ordinance of Nullification, but then they nullified the force bill that Jackson had passed. And so technically that's still on the books, their nullification of that bill. But that really was the first time South Carolina had shown a confrontational pose towards the national government. And it set the stage for what would happen 28 years later with the Ordinance of Secession. This is the most important document that we have in this building. It's one of the nation's most important documents because without this document, there is no Civil War. No other Southern state was going to secede if South Carolina did not secede first. So on December 17th, 1860, a convention of the people of South Carolina met in First Baptist Church, which still stands here in Columbia. And they decided at the end of the first day unanimously to secede from the Union. And then the convention moved in whole by train down to Charleston where they put the document together. But the decision to secede, the decision to fracture the state from the federal government, from the nation, was made here in Columbia, South Carolina. And we're very fortunate that the original Ordinance of Secession still survives and that it's located here. It's a wonderful document, and we took it around during the sesquicentennial of secession in 2010, especially in December 2010, so that the people of South Carolina could see this document that really represents hundreds of thousands of lives lost, hundreds of millions of dollars in property damage, emancipation of millions of African Americans, all of which came about as the result of this document being produced. That's James Chestnut's signature. That's the husband of Mary Boykin Chestnut, the famous diarist who wrote the Diary from Dixie, the most famous woman diarist from the war. Everyone on here would lose everything they had, basically, would lose all, would end up nearly penniless at the end of the war. Many of them would die during the war. And many of them would lose children in the war. I mean, I don't believe that many of them thought that what they were doing would result in the destruction of everything they loved, the destruction of everything they had, and the loss of so much. But there were a lot of miscalculations at the beginning of the war, and this was South Carolina's greatest miscalculation. We, during our budget hearings this year, took the Ordinance of Nullification with us to our budget hearings because nullification has been a topic that a lot of representatives have discussed, and it's been in the news a great deal in South Carolina. And so this document and how it was created and its impact provides a lot of lessons for South Carolinians. And so we want people to understand that no matter what path we take, someone's been along that path before, and it's incumbent upon us to learn from those lessons, learn our lessons from the past. And to do that, you have to have the documents, you have to have the history available to you so you can learn from it. And that's why we try to make these documents available to everybody and really publicize them as much as possible. Teach people about their past so that they can learn lessons from it and plot a prudent course going forward.